It was a scorching summer afternoon in the quiet suburb of Oak Ridge, where every house boasted manicured lawns and the hum of air conditioners filled the warm air. In a neighborhood that prided itself on outward appearances and a tightly held code of conduct, one incident was about to shatter the illusion of perfection. Karen Wallace, a middle-aged woman known throughout Oak Ridge for her self-righteous attitude and an unyielding belief in how things should be done, stood frowning on her pristine front lawn. Her eyes, fixed on a nearby house, had narrowed as she observed something she deemed unacceptable. Across the street, Officer Jamal Carter, a respected black police officer known for his calm professionalism and dedication to community safety, was methodically securing his modest home. With a practiced ease, Jamal checked that every lock was fastened and that the perimeter was secure, a routine act of responsibility. To Karen, however, this unassuming display was a provocation, a disruption to the strict order she was determined to uphold in her neighborhood. Without a moment's hesitation, Karen whipped out her cell phone and dialed 911. In a voice heavy with indignation and a touch of self-importance, she reported, "There's a black cop across the street causing a disturbance by securing his home. I demand that he be removed immediately." Her words rang out with a confidence born of prejudice, and as she continued to speak, her tone dripped with the conviction that she was protecting the sanctity of Oak Ridge. Onlookers began to emerge from behind trimmed hedges and tidy driveways, some nodding in agreement with her unwarranted complaint, while others exchanged uneasy glances. The crisp afternoon air was suddenly charged with tension, as if the neighborhood itself held its breath. Meanwhile, Officer Carter, entirely absorbed in his routine, paid no attention to the unfolding drama. His focus remained solely on the task at hand, ensuring his family's safety through a secure home. But fate, as it often does, had a twist in store. Within minutes, the sound of a police cruiser approaching signaled that the 911 call had been taken seriously. Karen watched with a smug satisfaction as officers arrived at the scene. However, what happened next would soon upend her self-assured worldview. As one of the responding officers began to question Jamal about the nature of the disturbance, Jamal calmly explained that he was merely performing his duty. Then, in a moment that would leave Karen utterly speechless, the officer casually mentioned a detail that shattered her prejudiced assumptions. Jamal was not only a dedicated cop securing his home, but he was also widely known in the community for his commendable service and integrity, attributes that starkly contradicted the baseless accusations Karen had just made. As murmurs spread among the gathered neighbors, and even Karen's smug expression began to falter, the stage was set for an explosive revelation. What Karen had intended as a righteous call to action was about to be exposed as nothing more than a misguided attempt to enforce her narrow, discriminatory views. In that charged moment, the seeds of accountability were sown, a moment when truth would rise to confront and dismantle deep-rooted prejudice. Oak Ridge was a neighborhood where outward perfection masked a complex undercurrent of tradition and exclusivity. The streets were lined with large, well-maintained homes and verdant lawns, and each resident took immense pride in maintaining the status quo. For many, Oak Ridge was a sanctuary, a place where every detail, from the color of the houses to the shape of the hedges, was meticulously curated to reflect an image of order and respectability. Karen Wallace was a fixture in this community. In her early 50s, she presented herself with an air of authority and moral superiority. Always impeccably dressed in tailored outfits and adorned with tasteful jewelry, Karen believed it was her duty to police the neighborhood. Over the years, she had built a reputation for being the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian of propriety. Whether it was questioning children's behavior at community events or dialing 911 over minor disturbances, Karen's actions were driven by a deep-seated belief that she was protecting the values of Oak Ridge. Yet behind her polished exterior lay a heart hardened by prejudice, a prejudice that had been nurtured by years of narrow-minded thinking. Across the street from Karen's meticulously manicured home lived Officer Jamal Carter, a man whose presence in Oak Ridge was a quiet testament to hard work and dedication. In his late 40s, Jamal had served his community as a police officer for over 2 decades. Known for his unwavering calm and commitment to justice, Jamal was respected by his colleagues and the residents alike. His home, modest but secure, was a symbol of the balance he maintained between his duty as a cop and his desire for a peaceful personal life. Every evening, as he performed routine security checks around his property, Jamal did so with the measured professionalism of someone who had faced countless challenges with dignity and grace. The contrasting worlds of Karen and Jamal were set against the backdrop of Oak Ridge, a neighborhood defined by its rigid adherence to tradition. On one side were those like Karen, who believed in a strict social order and took pride in enforcing it, no matter how small the transgression. On the other side were individuals like Jamal, who worked tirelessly to serve and protect, their lives a blend of personal sacrifice and public duty. The physical space of Oak Ridge, with its expansive lawns, private driveways, and stately homes, serve as a visual representation of these conflicting values. On that fateful summer afternoon, the quiet routine of Oak Ridge was interrupted by a seemingly trivial act: a black cop securing his home. To Karen, this act was an affront, a challenge to the established order she so fervently believed in. Her immediate reaction, to call 911 and demand that he be removed, was driven not by a genuine concern for safety, but by her own misguided sense of superiority. As she dialed the number, her heart raced with a self-righteous fervor, certain that she was taking a stand against what she perceived as a violation of community norms. Little did she know that her actions would soon set in motion a chain of events that would expose her prejudice for all to see. The stage was being set in a neighborhood where every facade of perfection was about to be tested by the unyielding force of truth and accountability. And as the police cruiser pulled up and the scene unfolded, the quiet heroism of Officer Jamal Carter would soon shine a light on the dangerous power of bias. Within moments of Karen's vehement 911 call, the normally placid ambience of Oak Ridge was disrupted. Officer Roberts, one of the local law enforcement officers dispatched from the nearby precinct, arrived on the scene with a sense of professional urgency. As he approached Jamal Carter's house, he could already sense that something was amiss, not from the routine act of securing a property, but from the tone of the complaint he had received. Karen's voice, recorded in the 911 call, was filled with a mixture of indignation and prejudice, and it left little doubt about her motives. Officer Roberts began his inquiry as he walked up the driveway. "Sir, can you explain what you were doing?" he asked calmly. Jamal, who had just finished checking the gate's automatic system, looked up with a gentle smile and replied, "I was simply securing my home, officer. Everything is in order." His tone was measured and factual, a stark contrast to the hysteria in Karen's voice. As Roberts continued to gather information, he pulled up the digital records from a nearby security camera that had captured the entire scene. The footage clearly showed Jamal methodically closing the pool gate and checking each lock, his actions routine and entirely justified. There was no sign of any disturbance, no behavior that could warrant a 911 call. Instead, the camera panned briefly to reveal Karen, standing in her immaculate front yard, phone in hand, her expression hard and unyielding. The evidence was irrefutable. What Karen had perceived as a disturbance was nothing more than a simple act of responsible home security. The gathered digital evidence quickly spread among the responding officers. Conversations buzzed in hushed tones. Many expressed disbelief that someone would misuse emergency services in such a manner. "She's really trying to police her neighborhood, isn't she?" one officer remarked. Others nodded in agreement, their frustration growing as they realized that Karen's call was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of behavior driven by deep-seated bias. Meanwhile, the incident was being documented by several neighbors who had gathered along the sidewalks of Oak Ridge. Videos and photographs began to circulate on social media, and hashtags such as hashtag Justice for Jamal and hashtag Stop 9/11 Prejudice started trending among those who supported the integrity of the community. The narrative was shifting. What had begun as an attempt to enforce arbitrary standards was now emerging as a symbol of the misuse of power and the dangers of unchecked bias. Karen, still watching from her front yard with a sense of triumph, grew increasingly agitated as more voices questioned her account. "This is just not right," one neighbor murmured, his voice tinged with disbelief. Others, who had long been critical of Karen's habit of making baseless calls, began to voice their disapproval more openly. The tension was palpable. What was meant to be a display of moral superiority had instead become a lightning rod for community outrage. Officer Roberts, who had now compiled a thorough report complete with security footage and witness statements, prepared to relay his findings to the local precinct. His report was clear and unambiguous. Jamal Carter had acted in full accordance with his duty, and there was no disturbance to speak of. In contrast, Karen's 911 call was driven solely by her own narrow, prejudiced views. The report, when shared with the community and later with local media, sparked a fierce debate about the appropriate use of emergency services and the responsibility of citizens to refrain from letting personal biases dictate public actions. As the day progressed, the digital evidence and community sentiment converged into a powerful call for accountability. The incident was no longer just about a closed pool gate. It had evolved into a critical examination of how prejudice could distort one's perception of reality and lead to actions that undermined the very values of fairness and justice. The conflict buildup had reached a boiling point, setting the stage for a dramatic escalation that would force the entire community of Oak Ridge to confront its own biases. In the days that followed, Oak Ridge found itself at the center of a burgeoning controversy. The footage of Jamal Carter's routine, responsible actions contrasted sharply with Karen Wallace's bitter, baseless 911 call, spread rapidly across social media platforms. Hashtags like #JusticeForJamal and #9/11 misuse began trending locally and even caught the attention of regional news outlets. What had started as a minor neighborhood dispute soon evolved into a full-scale debate on the misuse of emergency services and the underlying currents of racial prejudice that still plagued the community. Local residents, once divided by their adherence to tradition, now found common cause in condemning the blatant bias exhibited by Karen. Community forums, once quiet and polite, erupted with impassioned discussions. "This isn't about a pool gate," one resident argued at a town hall meeting. "It's about using public resources to enforce personal prejudice." Supporters of Jamal praised his calm professionalism and emphasized that his actions were exactly what any responsible homeowner would do. Meanwhile, those who had once sided with Karen began to waver as the undeniable digital evidence undermined her credibility. Within the Oak Ridge Police Department, the internal investigation was given top priority. Officer Roberts' detailed report, supported by video footage and corroborative witness statements, painted a damning picture of Karen's repeated misuse of 911. In a series of emergency meetings, senior officers debated the appropriate disciplinary measures and the need to review protocols to prevent future incidents driven by personal bias. "We cannot allow personal prejudice to dictate the use of our services," one senior officer declared during a closed-door meeting. The growing insistence on accountability began to resonate within the ranks, as younger officers, often more attuned to modern values of equality, called for reforms that would ensure every call was treated with the seriousness it deserved. As the internal investigation gained momentum, local media outlets published scathing editorials condemning the misuse of emergency services and the dangers of allowing prejudice to go unchecked. Headlines such as "When Hate Calls 911" and "Bias on Patrol," a community's wake-up call, ignited public discourse. Interviews with civil rights leaders and legal experts further fueled the debate, emphasizing that no one should be allowed to manipulate public systems to enforce a narrow, discriminatory view of society. Across Oak Ridge, protests and rallies began to take shape. At a community center near the heart of the neighborhood, residents gathered to demand not only accountability for Karen's actions, but also broader reforms in how emergency services were managed. Signs reading "Every Life Matters" and "Stop 9/11 Prejudice" waved in the hands of determined citizens. In passionate speeches, local activists decried the long history of bias that had led to such incidents and called for a future where respect and equality would reign supreme. The public pressure reached a crescendo when the local police department announced that it would release the complete internal report to the public. The transparency of this decision was seen as a direct challenge to those who had long suffered in silence. "We owe it to our community to be completely open about our practices," said a police spokesperson during a press conference. The report not only confirmed that Jamal Carter had acted appropriately, but also revealed that Karen Wallace had a history of similar calls that upon investigation were consistently found to be without merit and driven by personal bias. As digital evidence continued to pour in and local news segments highlighted the unfolding scandal, even longtime supporters of traditional community values began to reconsider their positions. The incident had exposed a deep fracture, a gap between the ideal of public service and the reality of how personal prejudice could be weaponized. Community leaders, urging calm yet steadfast action, called for workshops, town hall meetings, and policy revisions that would address the systemic issues at play. Amidst the escalating tension, Officer Roberts and other officials worked tirelessly to compile every piece of evidence into a comprehensive case file. This dossier, brimming with digital records, video footage, and eyewitness accounts, was set to become the cornerstone of the forthcoming disciplinary review. It was clear to everyone that this was not an isolated incident, but part of a pattern that demanded to be confronted head-on. The entire community of Oak Ridge found itself at a crossroads. The incident, initially dismissed by some as a trivial misunderstanding, had now become a potent symbol of the need for accountability in public service. As the debate raged on in public forums, on social media, and in the quiet conversations of neighbors, the stage was set for a dramatic turning point. The rising tide of voices demanding justice and reform would soon force the system to adapt, ensuring that no one could ever again misuse emergency services as a weapon of personal bias. The decisive moment arrived on a cool morning in a packed boardroom at the Oak Ridge Community Center. Senior officials, police department representatives, community leaders, and local media gathered to hear the final resolution of the internal investigation into Karen Wallace's 911 call. With an air of determined calm, the board's chair, Councilwoman Linda Price, stepped up to the podium. After a thorough and exhaustive review of all digital records, security footage, and eyewitness testimonies, we have reached an incontrovertible conclusion. Councilwoman Price began, her voice firm and resolute. It is abundantly clear that the call made by Mrs. Karen Wallace was not based on any legitimate disturbance, but was instead a manifestation of deep-seated prejudice. This is not a case of public safety. It is a case of abuse of our emergency services for personal, discriminatory purposes. Her words echoed across the silent room, and every eye was fixed on her. Effective immediately, Mrs. Wallace's history of similar calls will be subjected to a full disciplinary review, and we will implement new policies to ensure that our emergency resources are never again used as a tool for enforcing personal bias, she continued, her tone leaving no doubt that change was imminent. At that moment, a representative for the affected community, a dignified resident who had long been an advocate for justice, rose to speak. "I stand here today as a voice for every person in Oak Ridge who has been marginalized by such acts of prejudice," he declared. "Let this moment be the turning point when our community rejects hate and embraces accountability. We will no longer allow public resources to be misused to enforce narrow-minded views. Today, justice is not only served, it is a promise for our future." His powerful words were met with a resounding applause that filled the room with hope and determination. Following this, a senior police official presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of internal memos, digital footage, and eyewitness testimonies. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Karen Wallace's 911 calls had consistently been driven by personal bias rather than any legitimate concern for public disturbance. The Internal Affairs panel unanimously supported the decision to impose strict disciplinary measures and to revise emergency service protocols to prevent similar abuses. In that charged moment, the turning point was sealed. The balance of power in Oak Ridge had shifted decisively. The age-old abuse of authority by personal prejudice would no longer be tolerated. The public's unwavering demand for justice had forced the system to confront its own failures and commit to a future of transparency and accountability. Councilwoman Price concluded, "Today, we reclaim the integrity of our community. Let this decision stand as a beacon of hope and a declaration that every resident, regardless of background, will be treated with the respect they deserve. Our future will be built on fairness, accountability, and the unwavering commitment to justice for all." Her words, delivered with unwavering conviction, resonated deeply with everyone present, marking the beginning of a new era in Oak Ridge. In the weeks that followed the historic decision, Oak Ridge began a slow but determined process of healing and transformation. News of the disciplinary review into Karen Wallace's misuse of emergency services spread rapidly throughout local media, igniting a citywide dialogue about accountability, fairness, and the proper use of public resources. Community meetings, town halls, and public forums were held in abundance, each one serving as a platform for residents to express their shared commitment to a more just and inclusive neighborhood. Local newspapers and online platforms were abuzz with supportive messages. Hashtags such as hashtag Justice for Oak Ridge and hashtag No to Prejudice trended steadily, as residents celebrated the fact that accountability had been achieved. "This is a victory for every person who has ever been marginalized by outdated biases," one editorial declared. The sentiment was clear. The incident, once seen as a trivial misuse of a phone call, had become a catalyst for broader change, a turning point that exposed the deep-rooted issues in the community and demanded reform. The local police department, having been thrust into the spotlight, embarked on sweeping reforms. Under the leadership of Director Samuel Green and Lieutenant Marcus Daniels, new training programs on cultural sensitivity and ethical conduct were rolled out, ensuring that every officer understood the true meaning of impartial service. Regular internal audits were instituted and a transparent system for handling complaints was put in place. "We owe it to our community to uphold the highest standards of justice and equality," Lieutenant Daniels stated in a subsequent press conference, his words a promise that the past would not be allowed to repeat itself. Community leaders, too, took action. At a series of town hall meetings, residents discussed ways to improve communication between neighbors and to ensure that every 911 call was handled with the seriousness it deserved. Initiatives were launched to educate citizens about the proper use of emergency services, and workshops were held to address the broader issues of bias and prejudice. Our community's strength lies in our ability to learn from our mistakes and build a better future, one activist told a packed meeting. His words resonated deeply with those present, reinforcing the collective desire for lasting change. For Karen Wallace, the fallout was both a personal reckoning and a public lesson in accountability. Isolated and facing intense scrutiny, she was forced to confront the reality that her actions, motivated by deep-rooted prejudice, had not only disrupted the peace of Oak Ridge, but had also tarnished the reputation of a community that prided itself on fairness. While some longtime neighbors expressed disappointment, many others saw the incident as a necessary catalyst for change, a turning point that would ensure that no one could misuse public resources for personal vendettas again. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Oak Ridge, community members, local officials, and law enforcement representatives gathered under the gentle glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading, "Unity and Justice for All," was unfurled as speakers reiterated the lessons learned from the incident. Today, we celebrate not just a victory over individual prejudice, but the promise of a community that stands together against injustice, Councilwoman Price proclaimed in her closing remarks. The event was met with standing ovations, a powerful symbol of hope and a commitment to change. As Oak Ridge slowly resumed its daily rhythm, the legacy of that fateful day endured as a beacon of transformation. The story of how a prejudiced 911 call was exposed, dismantled, and ultimately turned into a movement for justice served as a lasting reminder that true accountability can emerge even from the most misguided actions. With every new sunrise over Oak Ridge, Residents carried with them the promise that the light of truth and unity would forever dispel the shadows of hate and discrimination.